The microphone hummed, a low, expectant sound that filled the cavernous auditorium. I gripped the sides of the lectern, my knuckles white. Thousands of faces blurred together, a sea of proud parents and bored siblings. I smiled. The practiced perfect valedictorian smile. I wouldn't be here without the unwavering support of my family, I began, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My parents, who taught me the value of hard work, and my brother, who taught me resilience. From the third row, I saw my mother dab a tear from her eye, a perfect little performance. Then I saw my brother, Leo. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at me, his face pale with fury. He stood up. The movement was so abrupt it sent a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. "I can't let you lie any more," he shouted, his voice cracking but carrying with shocking clarity. A gasp went through the auditorium. My smile froze. The dean took a step toward me. My father was half rising from his seat, his face purple. But all I could see was my brother, standing there like a ghost at the feast, ready to burn it all down. And the most terrifying part? He was right. I was lying. And my lie was about to get so much bigger. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. My family operates on a simple system of astrophysics. My brother, Leo, is the sun, a dazzling, volatile, and occasionally brilliant star, around which everything and everyone must orbit. My parents are the planets, caught in his gravitational pull, their entire existence dedicated to reflecting his light and absorbing his solar flares. And I, Lisa, am a distant, utilitarian moon. My job is to be stable, predictable, and to manage the tides, specifically the financial and emotional tides that Leo's chaotic orbit constantly churned up. I was the responsible one, the good one, the one who never caused any trouble. This was not a compliment, it was a job description. From the time I was 16, I was the designated crisis manager. When Leo, in a fit of artistic pique at 17, decided to experience the world and ended up stranded in another state with no money, it was my savings from a summer job at the local diner that paid for his bus ticket home. My parents didn't have the money. They'd just given Leo several $100s for his journey of self-discovery. When he returned, he was praised for his courage. I was given a pat on the head for being so sensible. This pattern repeated itself with dizzying regularity. There was the time he needed a new laptop for his graphic design course at the community college, a course he dropped out of 3 weeks later. The money came from a fund I was meticulously building for my own college applications. "He needs this for his future, Lisa," my mother had explained, her voice soft and reasonable. "You're so smart. You'll get scholarships. It's different for him. He's a creative." Being a creative in my family was a get-out-of-jail-free card for any and all irresponsible behaviour. It meant you weren't expected to hold down a job, pay your own bills, or finish anything you started. My role as the non-creative was to be the silent, uncomplaining sponsor of this perpetual state of becoming. My boyfriend Mark was the first person to look at our family portrait and notice that one of the figures was propping up all the others. He was an engineer, a man who believed in logic, stress tests, and sound structural integrity. Our family, he once observed quietly after a particularly draining holiday dinner, was built on a foundation of emotional quicksand. "They don't ask you for things, Lisa," he'd said as we drove home. "They just take them. And they've trained you to hand them over with a smile." I had defended them, of course. It was a reflex. "You don't understand," I'd said. "It's just how we are. We support each other." But the word support felt hollow. It was a one-way street, and I was the only one paying the toll. The truth was, I was less of a moon and more of a human ATM, and my family had long since forgotten the PIN was supposed to be a secret. They just assumed it was their right to make withdrawals whenever they pleased, and I was too tired, too conditioned, too desperate for their approval to ever deny the transaction. The road to my valedictorian speech was paved with instant noodles and all-nighters. My parents had made a grand show of promising to help with my university tuition. They'd announced it at a family gathering, raising their glasses to our brilliant daughter, Lisa, who is going to make us all so proud. The applause was warm, and for a moment I felt a glow of genuine familial pride. The glow faded quickly. The first tuition payment came due, and when I gently reminded my father, he looked flustered. "Oh, right," he'd said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Listen, honey, something's come up. A little tight this month." The something was Leo. He had decided, with the sudden, unshakable conviction of a prophet, that he needed to build a soundproof recording studio in our basement to produce his debut album. This involved expensive sound-dampening foam, a new mixing board, and a vintage microphone he claimed was essential for his unique sound. My tuition money, it turned out, had been repurposed as seed funding for his musical career. "It's an investment in his future," my mother explained, her eyes pleading with me to understand. "Once his album takes off, he'll be able to pay you back 10 times over." I didn't have the heart to tell her that Leo's musical talent was, to put it charitably, niche. It consisted mostly of him chanting beat poetry over dissonant guitar chords. So I took out loans. I got a second job, tutoring freshmen in calculus between my own classes and a weekend waitressing gig. My life became a carefully calibrated exercise in time management and caffeine consumption. While Leo was in the basement, finding his sound, I was in the library, finding my way through organic chemistry textbooks, my stomach growling because I'd skipped dinner to grade papers. The irony was suffocating. They called me the smart one, the responsible one, yet they had created a situation where I had to work twice as hard just to stay afloat, all while my brother's every whim was subsidized. My success was taken for granted, an expected outcome. His lack of it was a romantic struggle, a heroic battle against a world that just didn't understand his genius. They would call me at all hours. "Lisa, honey, Leo's car broke down. He needs it to get to his open mic night. It's a big opportunity for him. Could you possibly—" "Lisa, the electric bill is sky high because of the studio equipment. We're in a bit of a jam." Each call was a small paper cut, a tiny drain on my already depleted resources. I paid for the car repair. I sent money for the electric bill. I became an expert at juggling credit cards and robbing Peter to pay Paul. Except Paul was my brother, and he never, ever paid Peter back. Mark watched this all with a growing sense of alarm. He'd bring me food at the library, his face etched with worry. "This isn't sustainable, Lisa," he'd say, pushing a container of pasta toward me. "You're going to burn out." I'd just shake my head, too tired to argue. "It's almost over," I'd tell him. "Once I graduate, things will be different." But deep down, I was terrified they wouldn't be. I was on a hamster wheel, and graduating felt less like an escape, and more like they were just about to upgrade the wheel to a more advanced, more exhausting model. The breaking point, the tiny crack that would eventually shatter the entire facade, came a week before graduation. It was a Tuesday. I had just finished my last final exam and was feeling a dizzying mix of exhaustion and elation. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like I could breathe. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, which I shared with 2 other girls, making a list. A happy list. Graduation dress, shoes, a haircut. Small, normal things I'd been putting off for months. That's when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was thick with a manufactured panic I knew all too well. "Lisa, thank God you answered," she began. "It's Leo. He's had a terrible setback." I closed my eyes, my happy list forgotten. "What happened?" "His laptop died. The one with all his music, all his lyrics. It's completely gone. The man at the store said it's unrecoverable. He's devastated. He says his entire career is ruined. I took a slow breath. I'd heard this exact story with minor variations at least 3 times before. There was always a catastrophic equipment failure, always on the eve of a supposed breakthrough. "That's terrible, Mum," I said, my voice flat. "But he can write new songs." "You don't understand," she insisted, her voice rising. "This was his masterpiece, and he has a chance to meet with a real music producer next week, a friend of a friend. He needs to have a professional demo. He needs a new laptop, Lisa. A really good one. The kind the professionals use." Then came the pitch. "The one he needs costs $3,000. Your father and I, we've scraped everything together, but we're still short. We need $2,000, honey, just until your father's next paycheck." $2,000. The number was so absurd, so audacious, it was almost funny. It was the exact amount I had saved for a security deposit on a new apartment, my first real place, a place without roommates, a place where no one would eat my yogurt out of the fridge. It was my escape fund. And they knew it. I had told my mother about my apartment search just last week, my voice full of excitement. At the time she had sounded so happy for me. Now I realized she hadn't heard Lisa is getting her own place. She had heard Lisa has $2,000 saved up. For the first time in my life, a single powerful word rose up from the depths of my soul. It was a word I had swallowed 1,000 times, a word I had been conditioned to believe was the epitome of selfishness. "No," I said. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It was a silence filled with shock, indignation, and the sound of a well-oiled machine grinding to a halt. "What did you say?" my mother finally whispered, as if she couldn't have possibly heard me correctly. I said, "No, Mum. I can't. I need that money for my apartment." I braced myself for the explosion. The explosion didn't come. What came was worse. It was the cold, quiet chill of emotional winter. My mother didn't yell, she just sighed, a long, mournful sound filled with arias of disappointment. "I see," she said, her voice dropping to a wounded whisper. "After everything we've done for you. When your brother is in crisis. I never thought you could be so selfish, Lisa." She hung up before I could respond. That was their strategy. Not open warfare, but a campaign of psychological attrition. The next few days were a masterclass in passive aggression. My father didn't call me screaming. He just sent me a single text message. "Your mother is very hurt by your attitude." My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister and chief lieutenant, called me next. "Lisa, honey," she said, her voice oozing with concern. "Your mother told me you two had a little tiff. You know your brother, he's a sensitive soul, and your parents worry so much about him. You've always been the strong one. Can't you just help them out this one time?" This one time. The phrase was so ludicrous it made my head spin. My entire life had been a series of this one time. I was the family's designated strong one, which was code for the one who was expected to bear any burden without complaint. My strength wasn't a virtue, it was a utility. Then came the call from Leo himself. There was no pleading, no sadness, just pure, uncut rage. "You are trying to ruin my life," he screamed into the phone, his voice hoarse. "This was my one big shot, and you're too cheap and selfish to help your own brother. You've always been jealous of me. You're a bitter, boring little accountant, and you can't stand that I'm the one with the talent." The words were meant to hurt, and they did. But they also did something else. They clarified things. The fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my vision for years began to dissipate. He didn't see me as a sister. He saw me as an obstacle. My success wasn't something to be proud of. It was an insult to his lack of it. My refusal to fund his latest whim wasn't a personal boundary. It was a declaration of war. I was sitting in my apartment, the silence ringing in my ears after Leo had hung up on me when Mark came over. He found me staring at a blank wall, my phone clutched in my hand. He didn't say anything at first. He just put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "What did they do this time?" he asked gently. I told him everything. The phone call, the $2,000, the accusations, the guilt. When I was done, he just nodded. "Good," he said. I stared at him. "Good? What do you mean, good?" "You said no," he replied, a small smile on his face. "You finally said no. That's the first step. Now you just have to hold on." He was right. I had taken the first step into a new and terrifying territory, my own life. The problem was, my family was determined to drag me back across the border by any means necessary. Graduation day dawned bright and sunny, a picture-perfect backdrop for the melodrama my family had planned. They arrived at my apartment to help me get ready, which was their code for making sure I was sufficiently guilt-ridden before the main event. My mother didn't hug me. She just fussed with the collar of my graduation gown, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Your hair looks a little flat, Lisa," she said. It was her opening salvo. My father stood awkwardly by the door, holding a gift bag. "A little something to celebrate your big day," he said, avoiding my eyes. I opened it. Inside was a framed photo of our family, taken last Christmas. We were all smiling, a perfect happy family. It felt like a prop from a play, a piece of evidence from a crime scene. "Thank you," I said, my voice hollow. Leo was the last to arrive. He slouched against the doorframe, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and a smirk. He looked me up and down, his eyes full of a strange mix of resentment and pity. "Don't trip on your way to the stage," he said. It was his version of congratulations. The car ride to the university was a masterclass in psychological warfare. They spoke to each other, but not to me. They talked about the weather, the traffic, my Aunt Carol's new haircut, anything and everything to create a bubble of conversation that I was not invited into. I was an invisible passenger in my own life. When we arrived, they found their seats in the third row, front and centre. As I walked past them to join the other graduating students, my mother grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Lisa," she whispered, her voice low and intense. "We are all so proud of you. Don't forget who got you here. I hope your speech reflects that." It wasn't a reminder. It was a threat. A final warning to stay in my lane, to play the part of the grateful daughter. As I sat through the opening remarks and the dean's address, my mind was racing. I had the safe speech, the approved speech, tucked into the folder in front of me. It was the smart choice, the sensible choice. But as I looked out at the crowd, at the thousands of families celebrating a genuine milestone, and then looked at my own family, sitting there like a tribunal waiting to pass judgment, something inside me shifted. The years of being the strong one, of swallowing my feelings, of funding their lives at the expense of my own, all coalesced into a single, terrifying moment of clarity. They didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me to serve. My success was only valuable to them, insofar as it made them look good, or provided them with resources. The moment I claimed it for myself, I became the enemy. The dean called my name. "And now, it is my great honour to introduce this year's valedictorian, a student of remarkable intellect and dedication, Lisa Meyers." I walked to the podium, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I opened the folder. The safe speech was on top. Underneath it was the other one, the truth speech. I looked down at my family. My mother gave me a tight, warning smile. My father nodded curtly. Leo just stared, his arms crossed. In that instant, I made my choice. Graduation day dawned bright and sunny, a picture-perfect backdrop for the melodrama my family had planned. They arrived at my apartment to help me get ready, which was their code for making sure I was sufficiently guilt-ridden before the main event. My mother didn't hug me. She just fussed with the collar of my graduation gown, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Your hair looks a little flat, Lisa," she said. It was her opening salvo. My father stood awkwardly by the door, holding a gift bag. "A little something to celebrate your big day," he said, avoiding my eyes. I opened it. Inside was a framed photo of our family, taken last Christmas. We were all smiling, a perfect happy family. It felt like a prop from a play, a piece of evidence from a crime scene. "Thank you," I said, my voice hollow. Leo was the last to arrive. He slouched against the doorframe, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and a smirk. He looked me up and down, his eyes full of a strange mix of resentment and pity. "Don't trip on your way to the stage," he said. It was his version of congratulations. The car ride to the university was a masterclass in psychological warfare. They spoke to each other, but not to me. They talked about the weather, the traffic, my Aunt Carol's new haircut, anything and everything to create a bubble of conversation that I was not invited into. I was an invisible passenger in my own life. When we arrived, they found their seats in the third row, front and centre. As I walked past them to join the other graduating students, my mother grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Lisa," she whispered, her voice low and intense. "We are all so proud of you. Don't forget who got you here. I hope your speech reflects that." It wasn't a reminder. It was a threat. A final warning to stay in my lane, to play the part of the grateful daughter. As I sat through the opening remarks and the dean's address, my mind was racing. I had the safe speech, the approved speech, tucked into the folder in front of me. It was the smart choice, the sensible choice. But as I looked out at the crowd, at the thousands of families celebrating a genuine milestone, and then looked at my own family, sitting there like a tribunal waiting to pass judgment, something inside me snapped. The years of being the strong one, of swallowing my feelings, of funding their lives at the expense of my own, all coalesced into a single, terrifying moment of clarity. They didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me to serve. My success was only valuable to them insofar as it made them look good or provided them with resources. The moment I claimed it for myself, I became the enemy. The dean called my name. And now it is my great honour to introduce this year's valedictorian, a student of remarkable intellect and dedication, Lisa Meyers. I walked to the podium, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I opened the folder. The safe speech was on top. Underneath it was the other one, the truth speech. I looked down at my family. My mother gave me a tight, warning smile. My father nodded curtly. Leo just stared, his arms crossed. In that instant, I made my choice. I took a deep breath and pushed the safe speech aside. I looked out at the sea of faces, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't going to give the full truth speech, the raw, angry document I had written in the dead of night. I wasn't a monster. But I wasn't going to give the fake one either. I was going to walk a tightrope. I was going to tell the truth, but in a language they couldn't openly condemn. The language of plausible deniability. "Good afternoon, faculty, parents, and fellow graduates," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. "They tell you that university is a time for learning. You learn about history, about science, about art. But the most important lessons often happen outside the classroom. You learn about yourself. You learn what you're capable of. And you learn about the true meaning of sacrifice." I paused, letting the word hang in the air. I saw my parents shift in their seats. "Sacrifice is a word we hear a lot," I continued. "Parents sacrifice for their children. We are taught that this is the highest form of love. And I have been blessed to have a family that has taught me so much about sacrifice. They taught me that you can sacrifice your time, your energy, and your resources for the people you love." The words were beautiful. The subtext was brutal. I could feel the heat of their stares from the third row. I was supposed to be talking about them, but I was talking about me. I was the one who had sacrificed. My parents taught me the value of hard work, I said, looking directly at them now. They taught me that if you want something, you have to be willing to put in the hours, to work multiple jobs, to go without, to pour every ounce of your being into your goals. It's a lesson I took to heart. The crowd murmured in appreciation. It sounded like a tribute, but my family knew it was an indictment. They hadn't worked multiple jobs for me. I had. And my brother, I said, my voice softening. My brother taught me the most important lesson of all. He taught me about resilience. He taught me that no matter how many times you fall, no matter how many obstacles are in your way, no matter how many times your equipment fails at a critical moment, you have to find a way to keep going. You have to be strong. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who is counting on you to be the strong one. That's when I saw Leo's face change. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of disbelief. And then, pure rage. He had understood. I had taken their narrative, their carefully constructed myth of the brilliant, struggling artist and the supportive, loving family, and I had turned it inside out. I had exposed the truth without raising my voice, without shedding a tear, without saying a single word that anyone outside of our toxic little circle could possibly interpret as an attack. I was praising them for the very qualities they had forced upon me. It was the most honest and the most brutal speech I could have possibly given. And it was more than Leo could take. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and he started to shout, "I can't let you lie anymore!" The words echoed in the sudden, shocking silence. Every head in the auditorium swiveled towards the third row, where my brother stood, trembling with a rage that seemed to vibrate the very air around him. My father's hand was on his arm, trying to pull him down, but Leo shook it off. My mother looked like she had turned to stone, her face a mask of horror and fury. This was not part of the plan. The plan was for me to be the grateful, smiling prop in their family portrait. The plan was not for the other prop to come to life and start screaming. On stage, a strange and profound calm washed over me. The adrenaline vanished, replaced by an icy clarity. This was it, the moment of detonation. For years, I had lived in fear of this kind of confrontation, this kind of public scene. I had done everything in my power to avoid it, contorting myself into whatever shape they required to keep the peace. But now that it was here, I wasn't scared. I was relieved. The dean, a kind woman named Doctor. Albright stepped toward the microphone, her face a mixture of alarm and confusion. "Young man," she began, her voice firm, "this is highly inappropriate. Please sit down." But I held up a hand, stopping her. I leaned into the microphone, my eyes locked on my brother's. "It's all right, Doctor. Albright," I said, my voice carrying through the silent hall. "My brother is right." Another collective gasp rippled through the audience. I could see the confusion on their faces. They were expecting me to be humiliated, to burst into tears. They weren't expecting me to agree with him. "I've been lying," I continued, my voice clear and steady. "I stood up here and I talked about sacrifice and resilience. And I let you all believe I was talking about my family's support for me. But that was a lie of omission. The truth is, I was talking about my sacrifice for them." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so deep you could hear 1,000 hearts beating. I had their complete and undivided attention. My parents looked like they were about to faint. My father's face was a mottled shade of red, and my mother was clutching her pearls as if her life depended on it. Leo just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, looking like a child who had set a fire and was only now realizing he was trapped in the burning building. He had meant to expose me, to shame me into silence. Instead, he had given me the stage. He had handed me the microphone and a captive audience, and he had given me permission to tell the truth. And I was going to take it. "So, with your permission," I said, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the faculty and my fellow graduates, "I'd like to finish my speech. But this time, with no more lies." I had them. I had all of them. And for the first time in my life, I was going to tell my story. "The truth is," I began, my voice resonating with a strength I didn't know I possessed, "that I paid for almost every cent of my education myself. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I lived on instant noodles and 3 hours of sleep a night. I did this because the college fund my parents had promised me was given to my brother to build a recording studio in their basement." The murmurs started then, a low buzz of shock and disbelief. I didn't look at my family, but I could feel their collective glare like a physical force. I kept my eyes on the back wall of the auditorium, focusing on a single point of light. "The truth is, my brother's artistic career, his journey of self-discovery, has been almost entirely funded by me. Not through gifts, but through a series of loans for emergencies that were never ever repaid. I paid for his rent, his car repairs, his equipment, his trips. I did this while I was a full-time student, struggling to keep my own head above water." I paused, taking a sip of water. My hand was perfectly steady. The icy calm hadn't left me. I felt like I was narrating a documentary about someone else's life. "Just last week," I continued, "my family asked me for $2,000 for a new laptop for my brother. When I said no, because I needed that money for a security deposit on my first apartment, I was called selfish. I was told I was trying to ruin my brother's life. I was given the silent treatment and told I wasn't welcome in their home until I changed my attitude." The buzzing in the crowd grew louder. People were turning to look at my family, their expressions a mixture of pity and disgust. My family was no longer a tribunal. They were an exhibit. For years, I have been told that I am the strong one, their responsible one. I was taught that my role was to be the stable bedrock upon which my brother's artistic temperament could flourish. My successes were expected. His failures were romanticized. My dreams were secondary. His whims were emergencies. I finally allowed myself to look at them. My mother was openly weeping, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage and humiliation. My father looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. And Leo? Leo looked broken. The anger had drained out of him, replaced by a look of utter devastation. He had started this, but he had no idea how it would end. "So, yes, my brother was right," I said, my voice softening slightly. "I was lying. I was going to stand up here and pretend to be the grateful daughter of a supportive family because that's what I've been doing my entire life, determined by your utility to others. Your dreams are not secondary, and sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is to stop keeping the peace and start telling the truth." I stepped back from the podium. For a moment, there was absolute silence. And then, someone started to clap. Then another, and another, until the entire auditorium, minus 3 people in the 3rd row, rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. The aftermath was a blur of surreal moments. Dr. Albright, the dean, was at my side instantly, her arm around my shoulders. She didn't look angry. She looked fiercely protective. 2 campus security officers were calmly but firmly escorting my family out of the auditorium. My mother was wailing, a high theatrical sound. My father was stone-faced, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Leo looked like a ghost, pale and insubstantial, allowing himself to be led away without a word. The standing ovation continued for what felt like an eternity. My fellow graduates were cheering, some of them crying. It was as if I had given voice to some unspoken truth for all of them. Mark was the first person to reach me as I came down from the stage. He just wrapped me in a hug, and I let myself sag against him, the icy calm finally beginning to thaw, replaced by a tremor of shock. "You were incredible," he whispered in my ear, absolutely incredible. In the dean's office, things became even more surreal. Dr. Albright poured me a cup of tea, her hands shaking slightly. "In 20 years as an educator," she said, "I have never seen anything like that. That took a kind of courage I can't even fathom." She told me not to worry about anything. The university would handle the press if there was any. They would support me in any way I needed. It was clear from her tone that she had seen enough in those few minutes to understand the entire dynamic. My family hadn't just been disruptive. Their behaviour had been a confirmation of everything I had said. My phone, which I had left with Mark, was a war zone. There were dozens of missed calls and a flood of text messages. They were a chaotic mix of rage and disbelief. From my mother, "How could you do this to us? You have humiliated us in front of everyone. You are no daughter of mine." From my father, "You have made a terrible mistake. You will regret this." From Leo, "I hate you. I will never forgive you for this." And then there were the messages from my extended family, the aunts and uncles and cousins who had been fed my parents' narrative for years. Most were variations on a theme. "Lisa, what on earth happened? Your mother is hysterical. You need to call her and apologise immediately." They saw a public scene, and their immediate conditioned response was to smooth it over, to force an apology from the person who had disrupted the status quo. It didn't matter that the status quo was rotten to the core. But then there were other messages. A text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, I just heard what happened. All I can say is, it's about time someone stood up to them. I'm on your side." A voicemail from an old high school friend who was in the audience. "Lisa, wow. I'm speechless. And so proud of you." I sat in the dean's office, sipping my tea, and made a decision. I methodically went through my contacts and blocked my mother, my father, and my brother. The act was simple, almost anticlimactic, but it felt like severing a poisoned limb. The lines of communication were closed. The war of words was over. I had fired the last shot, and it had been a cannonball. The days following the graduation were a strange mixture of chaos and calm. The story became a minor local legend, the valedictorian who told all. There were a few articles in the local paper and a flurry of gossip on community Facebook pages. My family, as I had expected, went into full damage control mode. They spun a tale of a mentally unstable daughter, prone to exaggeration and dramatic outbursts, who had a nervous breakdown on stage. They claimed they had been supporting me all along, and that my speech was a fantasy, born of stress and jealousy towards my more creative brother. Some people bought it. The relatives who were already firmly in my parents' camp clucked their tongues and shook their heads at my terrible behaviour. My Aunt Carol posted a long, vague message on social media about the importance of forgiveness and not airing dirty laundry in public, which was clearly aimed at me. But the narrative didn't stick the way my parents had hoped. Too many people had been there. They had seen my composure on stage. They had seen my brother's unhinged outburst. They had seen my parents' faces, contorted with rage, not concern. The visual evidence was too powerful. My family had built their reputation on a carefully curated image of middle-class respectability, and in the space of 10 minutes, I had burned that image to the ground. The public humiliation was, for them, a fate worse than death. They became social pariahs in their own community. Friends stopped calling. Neighbours crossed the street to avoid them. The shame was relentless. I, on the other hand, felt a profound sense of peace. I moved my things out of my old apartment and into a new one with Mark. It was a small, sunny one-bedroom, and the first thing I did was buy a new yogurt and put it in the fridge, knowing with absolute certainty that it would be there in the morning. It was a small, silly thing, but it felt like the ultimate luxury. I started my new job as a junior analyst at a financial firm. The work was challenging and engaging, and for the first time, I was earning a salary that was entirely my own. I opened a savings account, a retirement fund, and a travel fund. I was building a life, not just managing a crisis. The biggest change was the silence. For years, my life had been filled with the noise of my family's needs, the frantic phone calls, the guilt-laden text messages, the constant low-level anxiety of waiting for the next emergency. Now there was just quiet. It was a beautiful, expansive quiet, filled with possibility. I started therapy, something I had never had the time or money for before. My therapist helped me unpack the years of emotional manipulation and gaslighting. She gave me a name for what I had experienced: parentification. I had been forced to be the parent to my own parents and my sibling, robbed of my own childhood and adolescence. Understanding the dynamic didn't excuse their behaviour, but it helped me to see that it wasn't my fault. I wasn't selfish or ungrateful. I was a victim of a deeply dysfunctional system. And I had finally, spectacularly, broken free. I learned about the continued fallout for my family through a sort of second-hand intelligence network. My cousin, the one who had texted me her support, would occasionally call with updates, which she delivered with a kind of grim satisfaction. The story she told was one of a slow, inevitable collapse. Without me as their financial and emotional backstop, my family's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Leo was the first to go into a tailspin. His dream of being a rock star, propped up for so long by my forced contributions, collided with the harsh reality of needing to pay his own bills. The music producer he was supposed to meet, a meeting that had precipitated the whole laptop crisis, turned out to be nothing more than a guy my dad knew from the gym who had once been a roadie for a local cover band. There was no record deal, there was no big break. There was just the silence from the basement studio, which was now just a basement again. He had to get a job. He ended up working at a big box electronics store, a place filled with the kind of expensive equipment he used to dream of owning. The irony was not lost on my cousin. My parents, meanwhile, were struggling to maintain their lifestyle. It turned out that their financial mismanagement went far deeper than just subsidizing Leo. They were in debt up to their eyeballs, a fact they had successfully hidden as long as I was around to plug the leaks. Without my income to supplement theirs, they had to sell the house I grew up in, the house with the basement studio. They moved into a small, cramped apartment in a less desirable part of town. The public shame was compounded by a private financial ruin. According to my cousin, my mother spent most of her days crying, mourning the loss of her social standing. My father became withdrawn and bitter, drinking more than he should. They blamed me for everything, of course. In their version of events, they were the victims of a cruel, vindictive daughter who had destroyed their lives for no reason. They never once, not for a single moment, acknowledged their own role in the disaster. There was no accountability, no remorse. Hearing these stories, I expected to feel something: schadenfreude, pity, maybe even a flicker of guilt. But I felt nothing. It was like hearing about the misfortunes of strangers. Their lives, which had once been so inextricably linked with mine, now felt a million miles away. Their problems were no longer my problems. Their crises were no longer my emergencies. I had resigned my position as their crisis manager, and the company had gone bankrupt shortly thereafter. It was a sad story, but it wasn't my story anymore. My story was just beginning. My life with Mark was a revelation. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, support, and a shared love of bad science fiction movies. Our home was a sanctuary, a place of peace and laughter. There were no manufactured dramas, no emotional landmines. We had disagreements, of course, but we resolved them by talking, by listening, by apologizing. It was a dynamic so healthy and normal it felt revolutionary. We started our own traditions. On Sundays, we'd go for a hike and then cook a big dinner together. We hosted game nights with friends, our small apartment filled with warmth and easy camaraderie. These were my people, my chosen family. They were people who celebrated my successes without a hint of jealousy, who listened to my problems without trying to make them their own, who loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. One evening, about a year after the graduation, Mark and I were looking through old photos. He came across a picture of me from my first year of university. In the photo, I looked exhausted, my smile thin and strained. There were dark circles under my eyes. I remembered that day. I had just come off a double shift at the restaurant and had a midterm the next morning. My mother had called me an hour earlier to ask for money for one of Leo's emergencies. "I don't even recognise that person anymore," I said quietly, tracing the outline of my own tired face. "She looks so trapped." Mark put his arm around me. "She was," he said. "But she was also a fighter. She just didn't know it yet." He was right. That tired, trapped girl had a core of steel she hadn't yet discovered. She was the one who worked 3 jobs, who aced her classes, who endured the constant emotional manipulation, and who, in the end, found the courage to burn it all down to save herself. I felt a surge of compassion and pride for her, for the person I used to be. I had to go through that fire to become the person I was today. The scars were there, faint and silvery, but they no longer hurt. They were just a reminder of how far I had come. They were a map of my escape. I'd learned the hard way that family is not always a safe harbour. Sometimes it's the storm. And the bravest thing you can do is to sail away and find your own shore. 2 years after what my friends and I now jokingly referred to as the speech, I was promoted to a senior analyst position at my firm. The promotion came with a significant raise, and Mark and I decided it was time to buy a place of our own. We found a small house with a little garden and a bright sunny kitchen, much like the one I had dreamed of all those years ago. The day we got the keys, I felt a sense of accomplishment so profound it almost made me dizzy. This was mine, ours, built not on sacrifice and obligation, but on hard work, partnership, and love. I had a life that was quiet, stable, and happy. It was the life my parents had always claimed to want for me, but it was a life I could only achieve once I was free of them. I never spoke to them again. I heard through my cousin that they had moved to a different state, hoping to escape the shadow of the scandal I had created. Leo, apparently, went with them. The 3 of them, a tiny toxic ecosystem, adrift in a new place, with no one left to exploit but each other. I sometimes wondered if they ever talked about that day, if they ever felt a flicker of remorse. I doubted it. People like them don't change. Their worldview is built on a foundation of entitlement and blame. In their story, they will always be the victims, and I will always be the villain. And I have learned to be okay with that. I would rather be the villain in their story than a victim in my own. Being the strong one in a dysfunctional family is a trap. It's a role that sounds like a compliment but is actually a life sentence of servitude. Your strength is not for you, it's for them. It's the dam that holds back the flood of their irresponsibility. My dam had to break for me to be free. The flood was messy and destructive, but it washed away the toxic landscape and allowed something new and healthy to grow in its place. My life is my own now. My successes are my own. My peace is my own. I earned it. I fought for it. And I will never, ever let anyone take it from me again. The silence from my family became a permanent fixture in my life, a quiet background hum that I eventually stopped noticing. It was no longer an angry, punitive silence, but simply an absence. They were gone. The space they had occupied in my head, the vast and cluttered real estate, dedicated to anticipating their needs and managing their emotions, was now empty. I filled it with other things, with complex financial models and challenging work projects, with plans for a trip to Italy with Mark, with learning how to bake sourdough bread, with quiet evenings spent reading in our new home. The peace was absolute, but the story of my graduation speech became a part of my personal mythology. When I told new friends about my family, I would simply say, "We're estranged," and leave it at that. But for those who knew the whole story, it was a defining moment. It was the day I chose myself. It was the day I stopped being a supporting character in someone else's drama and became the lead in my own life. The question of whether I went too far sometimes crossed my mind in the dead of night. Was there another way? Could I have achieved the same freedom without the public spectacle, without the complete and utter demolition of my family's reputation? I would play out the scenarios. I could have just walked away quietly. I could have continued to say no, to set boundaries and to endure their escalating campaign of guilt and manipulation in private. But I honestly don't think it would have worked. They were masters of a private war. Their power was in the shadows, in the quiet, unwitnessed moments of gaslighting and emotional blackmail. As long as the battle was fought behind closed doors, they would always have the upper hand, because they had no rules of engagement. Their entire system depended on the illusion of normalcy, on the public face of a happy, supportive family. The only way to win was to turn on the lights. Public exposure wasn't just an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. It was the only weapon I had that they were vulnerable to. Shame. They were immune to reason, to pleading, to my own pain. But they were not immune to shame. It was their kryptonite. Detonating that bomb on the graduation stage was messy, and it caused a lot of collateral damage. But it was also definitive. It ended the war in a single fiery blast. There was no long, drawn-out siege. There was no question about who had won. It was a clean break, a total severance. And in the quiet, peaceful life I have built from the ashes, I can't bring myself to regret it. One afternoon, I was cleaning out an old storage box and found the program from my graduation. I flipped through it, my eyes scanning the list of names, the photos of the faculty, the schedule of events. And there it was. Valedictory Address by Lisa Meyers. I smiled. I thought about the two speeches, the one I was supposed to give and the one I actually gave. The first was a lie, a carefully constructed piece of fiction designed to maintain a fragile, toxic peace. The second was the truth, a truth so powerful it had shattered that peace forever. I thought about the nature of truth. We are often taught that the truth should be gentle, that it should be delivered with kindness and compassion. But sometimes the truth is not gentle. Sometimes the truth is a hammer. And sometimes you have to be willing to swing it to break down the walls of your own prison. My family had built a prison around me, a prison of obligation, guilt, and emotional debt. And they had convinced me that the prison was a loving home. The only way out was to name it for what it was, to expose the bars and the locks to the light of day. The most insidious part of their control was how they had co-opted the language of love and family. "We support you," they said as they drained my bank account. "We're proud of you," they said as they took my success for granted. "We're family," they said, as they demanded my subservience. They had turned the most beautiful words into weapons. My speech was an act of reclamation. I took back the words. I took back the narrative. I took back my life. I put the program back in the box. It was a relic from a different era, a different life. The girl who had stood on that stage felt like a distant ancestor, a brave warrior from my own personal history whose courage had made my current life possible. I owed her everything. And I honoured her by living the life she had fought so hard for me to have. A life of freedom, a life of peace, a life of my own making. The final lesson I learned from this whole ordeal was about strength. My entire life, I was told I was the strong one. I had internalized this belief, carrying it as both a burden and a badge of honor. I thought strength meant enduring, absorbing, and tolerating. I thought strength was about how much you could carry for other people. I was wrong. That isn't strength. That's just being a beast of burden. True strength is not about how much you can tolerate before you break, but where you draw the line and refuse to be broken. True strength is the power to say no. It's the courage to choose your own well-being over the comfort of those who are harming you. It's the willingness to be seen as difficult, or selfish by people who have a vested interest in your compliance. My family didn't want me to be strong. They wanted me to be endlessly accommodating. They praised my strength as long as it served them. The moment my strength became about protecting myself, they called it cruelty. The moment I used my strength to build a boundary instead of carrying a burden, they called it betrayal. I see it so clearly now. The dynamic was never about love or family. It was about power and control. I was a resource, an asset to be managed. My graduation, my academic success, was something they wanted to own, to display in their trophy case of family achievements. My speech was me smashing the trophy case and taking my own trophy back. It was me declaring that my achievements, my life and my future belonged to me and me alone. They were not for sale. They were not for barter, and they were certainly not available to be used as collateral for my brother's imaginary music career. Mark and I got married on a crisp autumn day in a small ceremony with just a handful of our closest friends. It was a day filled with laughter, happy tears, and a sense of profound, unshakable peace. There was no family drama, no hidden agendas, no one to please but ourselves. It was perfect. During the reception, my best friend Sarah, who had been my roommate in university and had witnessed years of my family's dysfunction firsthand, gave a toast. "To Lisa," she said, raising her glass. "I have never known anyone stronger, braver, or more deserving of happiness. You taught me that sometimes you have to burn down your old life to build a new one. And look at the beautiful life you've built." I looked around the room, at the smiling faces of my friends, my chosen family. I looked at Mark, my husband, my partner, my rock, and I knew she was right. This was the life I had built. It wasn't the life I was given. It was the life I had fought for. The ghosts of my past were finally gone. They had no power here. They had no place in this room, in this marriage, in this life. They had been banished, not by anger or hatred, but by something far more powerful: happiness. My happiness was my ultimate victory. My peace was my final revenge. And it was so much sweeter than I could have ever imagined. The past was a story I could now tell without pain, a lesson I had learned, a battle I had won. The future was a blank page, and for the first time in my life, I was the only one holding the pen. Years have passed. My life is full and happy. Mark and I have 2 children of our own now, a boy and a girl. And as I raise them, I'm so conscious of the lessons I learned from my own upbringing. I'm teaching them that love is not an obligation, that support is a two-way street, that no is a complete sentence and a valid answer, that their dreams are their own and their worth is inherent, not based on their utility to anyone else. I'm giving them the childhood I never had, one free from emotional manipulation and parentified responsibility. I'm raising them to be strong, not in the way I was told I was strong, but truly strong, resilient, independent, and secure in the knowledge that they are loved, unconditionally. I have no idea what happened to my parents or my brother. They are a closed chapter, a book I have no desire to reopen. For all I know, they could be living next door and I wouldn't recognize them. They are strangers to me now, ghosts from a former life. Sometimes I wonder if my children will ever ask about them, about the grandparents and the uncle they have never met. If they do, I will tell them the truth, in an age-appropriate way. I will tell them a story about a very brave young woman who had to make a very difficult choice to save herself. I will tell them that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the most, and that it's okay to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share the same blood. It's a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. It's the lesson that saved my life. So I stand by my choice. I have no regrets. The public nature of my rebellion was the only thing that could have set me free. It was a scorched earth policy, but the ground was poisoned to begin with. Nothing healthy could ever have grown there. I had to burn it all down to start again. My speech was not just a moment of defiance, it was an act of creation. In those 10 minutes, I destroyed the old Lisa, the compliant, peacekeeping, long-suffering daughter. And from her ashes, I created a new one, a woman who knew her own worth, who fought for her own happiness, and who would never, ever again, allow herself to be a supporting character in someone else's story. It was the most important speech I will ever give. It was my Declaration of Independence, my Emancipation Proclamation, and it was the beginning of my real life. But I still wonder what you think, what the world thinks. When you are pushed to the absolute limit, when you are trapped in a system of abuse that is disguised as love, what is the right way to fight back? Did I go too far, using a public forum to expose and humiliate my family? Or was it the only way to win a war against people who had no honour, no mercy, and no shame? You tell me.